Hello and welcome to sdpn's 2023-2024 NBA season previews. Today it is day 2 of our Texas showcase. We are going a little south to Houston to see how the Rockets stack up this season. Arguably no team has changed as much in the offseason as Houston did, who are introducing 6 players that are likely to play major rotation minutes for them. Add to the fact that they hired a new head coach to take helm of a young, exciting core, and the Rockets are probably one of the most intriguing rosters heading into next season. But how is it all gonna look? But first, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel for more NBA content. The season is almost here, and we have tons of great videos coming your way to get you prepped for what should be an awesome season. Houston headed into the offseason with a goal in mind. They no longer wanted to be bottom feeders in the West. Their first point of business, they let go of head coach Stephen Silas immediately following their final game and instead hired Ime Udoka. Udoka coached the Celtics for 1 season and helped lead them to the NBA Finals, but was suspended for his 2nd season following an inappropriate workplace relationship. Regardless of what you think of the Udoka situation and how the Rockets handled things, he is a well-liked coach amongst players and other coaches. And while we can continue to debate the ethical implications of this hire, ultimately he commands a ton of respect, and that helped position the Rockets well heading into free agency. Despite being linked to a James Harden reunion with over $60 million in cap space available to them, the Rockets went a different route, deciding instead to fill out their rotation with vocal veterans who can establish a culture in Houston. That plan worked, getting arguably one of the best free agents available, guard Fred VanVleet, and signing him to a whopping 3-year, $130 million deal. That deal makes Fred one of the highest paid guards in the entire league next season, which is wild, but the Rockets knew who they wanted and went out and got him. In VanVleet, the Rockets can theoretically have a locker room presence, a former NBA champion who's turned himself into a borderline all-star and elite shooter. He had a down season with the Raptors last year and didn't look all that healthy in Toronto, but the 29-year-old guard is square in the midst of his prime and can bring a level of stability on the floor for Houston. The question with VanVleet ultimately will be how healthy he looks, because he is an elite point of attack defender when he is. He can revitalize their defense through that if his minutes are managed properly in Houston. Offensively, it might be an even bigger question mark with VanVleet, because to put it lightly, he likes to call his own number. He's not afraid to shoot the ball, and he's not the most efficient player either. He struggles at the rim because of his size, and while he's a good driver, he rarely finishes at the basket. How does that work when the Rockets also have to prioritize the development of their other shot creators, mainly Jalen Green, Amen Thompson, and Jabari Smith Jr.? It's ultimately the biggest question for the Rockets heading into next season: what role VanVleet assumes both on and off the floor, and how much he can adapt. The good news is that VanVleet is also an elite off-ball player, so theoretically he can play next to guys like Green and Thompson and still be effective. But is that what he wants, to reduce his usage? It's a huge question heading into next year. And as far as shot distribution goes, the Rockets sort of doubled down on that lingering question with their other big free agency signing, inking Dillon Brooks to a 4-year, $86 million deal. Brooks, like VanVleet, helps the Rockets immensely defensively. He's an elite perimeter defender, great at guarding multiple positions, and is coming off an all-defense season. But like VanVleet, he shot below 40% from the field last year. He's trigger happy and calls his own number more than most, despite being a shaky shot maker and creator. That being said, I think he does bring tremendous value to this Rockets team, and he showed just how important of a leader he is this summer at the FIBA World Cup for Team Canada, helping lead them to the country's first ever Olympic berth and a bronze medal. Brooks was arguably Canada's second best player next to SGA this summer, and he wasn't taking bad shots or making poor decisions. In fact, he looked great, especially defensively, where he locked down guys consistently in the tournament. I think Brooks is due for a big year if he buys into a similar role in Houston, taking less shots, being a smarter offensive player, and playing all defense basketball on the other end. It didn't stop there as far as free agency went for the Rockets. They signed Jock Landale to a 4-year, $32 million deal to be their backup center. Landale was solid for Phoenix last season and played some big minutes for them in the playoffs with DeAndre Ayton in a funk. And ultimately, he can be a good solid presence for them on the inside who doesn't require much usage to get his game off. They also inked NBA champion Jeff Green, aka Uncle Jeff, to a 2-year 3-year, $16 million deal. Green was pretty important for Denver last season as their de facto big man for their championship run, and I'm honestly kind of surprised he didn't stick around in Denver, but he is a massive locker room presence and one of the most well-respected veterans in the entire league. In VanVleet, in Brooks, in Landale, and Green, the Rockets decided to add adults to their locker room this season in hopes that their habits can rub off on Houston's young nucleus. It's the right idea, in theory, but that process is dependent on a few things. Number one, how much Udoka can get both the veterans and the young guys to buy in on the process and be on the same page. And number two, how much the young guys actually respect and want to learn from these veterans. These aren't questions we can answer now, but I think there's a pretty good shot that, depending on the shot distribution, there's a way to keep everyone happy in this equation. How does that look on the court and how successful it'll be? Well, that remains to be seen. But there is no question that the Rockets markedly improved in free agency, especially on the defensive end with the additions of VanVleet and Brooks, two guys who project to be starters for them this season. It wasn't only free agency where the Rockets were busy. They were also big winners at the NBA draft, nabbing Amen Thompson with the 4th overall pick and Cam Whitmore with the 20th pick. Thompson is one of my favorite players in this draft, much like his brother, who I talked about in the Pistons preview. They both share similar traits too. They are large, wing-sized guards who can defend multiple positions. They are elite with the ball in their hands as creators, using their athleticism in creative ways to create advantages for themselves and others. Much like his brother, and arguably even better than his brother, Amen has elite vision and is an incredible athlete. The big question for him, much like his brother, will be how much the jump shot develops, and I think that ultimately will determine his ceiling as a player in this league. But I think playing next to shooters like VanVleet, Green, Smith, and even Brooks, Amen can be free to play his game. Defensively, he's going to be able to guard multiple positions on the perimeter as well, and I think that's only going to bolster Houston's point of attack defense. It is going to be hard to keep Thompson out of the starting lineup, and I think eventually, maybe even as soon as the end of the season, he'll start for this team. But I think Brooks will open the season as a starter, with Amen coming off the bench as their 6-man backup point guard. And I think that is actually going to help him developmentally. He can be their main creator in transitional lineups, and he can help their offense stay afloat with the bench unit. He can play next to their starters in certain situations, and with VanVleet and Green being elite off-ball guys, he can create in those lineups too. He's not going to get the usage necessary to be in the Rookie of the Year race, but he's going to be a highlight machine and should be an awesome spark plug for their offense as far as creation goes. I think the same could be said for Whitmore, who was actually projected to go top 5 in the draft, but fell after a poor draft process. Cam and Amen both showed out in the Vegas Summer League as a nice tandem, and while I'm not sure there will be enough guard minutes for Cam to see extended run this season, there's a world where he can be a creator for them off of the bench. It's honestly really hard to pick one singular player that I'm intrigued by heading into this season for Houston, because you can literally pick any rotational player for them for a litany of reasons. Can VanVleet have a bounce back year and show he was worth the money? Can Brooks shut up the haters? But I think the Rockets' 4 young guys will be the most intriguing of the bunch. Maybe the most important will be their guard Green, who could potentially have a breakout season. Green was a 22-point per game guy for the Rockets last year, and while he hasn't been efficient as a scorer by any means in the first 2 seasons of his career, he's a 3-level scorer that can be a bucket all the time. He's continuing to improve at reading the floor and making plays, and that needs to be a massive area of growth for his game this year, but ultimately, I think he can be even more efficient next to these new Rockets. It takes a while for guards, especially lead scoring guards, to figure out their way through the league, and I think entering year 3, Green can have a really big year, and he's the swing factor between this team being a bottom feeder and maybe sneaking into the play-in race. By that same notion, Smith Jr. is a very intriguing player to watch this season too. He dominated in the Summer League and showed off an improvement as a shot creator and scorer. If any of that translates into year 2 for him, his ceiling changes immensely. The Rockets sort of failed Jabari last year, okay, in my opinion, because the roster just wasn't built to facilitate the growth of a guy who was more of a play finisher and defender, and he struggled to shine because of it. He only shot 30% from 3 last year, and that will be the most important number to keep an eye on offensively. Jabari came into the league known for his shooting, so that is going to determine his ultimate ceiling in this league. But defensively is where Bari, I think, is going to continue to thrive. He's almost 7 feet tall and is a perfect weak side rim protector. He can guard multiple positions and is clearly a player that takes pride in that side of the ball. With Van Vliet, Brooks, Green, Bari, and Thompson, the Rockets project to be a pretty good point of attack defense despite Green not being the best defender. Speaking of defense, that is going to be the biggest question mark for the Rockets' big man in the middle, Alperen Şengün. There is no denying Şengün's feel offensively. He projects to be an elite playmaking hub as a big man who can make some great passes out of the high post. The Rockets should and could run a bunch of delay actions with him to get their shooters and scorers open, and there's definitely room for him to thrive in that department. The big question will quite simply be how he can stay alive on defense. He's slow-footed, has bad anticipation skills on that end, and is probably a little too small to be a rim protector. Now, there were rumors that he grew to 7 feet this summer, but who knows? That could change things. Regardless, if Şengün can ever get to being a net neutral defender, it'll be a huge win, not only for his career, but for the Rockets long term. And I'd be remiss without mentioning the fourth intriguing young guy on the roster for the Rockets, Tari Eason, a long, rangy, defensive-minded player who's going to be an elite complementary piece for them. The offensive side of the ball is still an adventure for him because he's such an unorthodox mover, especially at his size, but he's shown some upside as a creator and play finisher and didn't shoot the ball all that bad last season on low volume, knocking down nearly 35% of his threes. I like Eason a lot. I think he can prove to be big for them defensively. There's a world in which the Rockets can have one of the best small ball lineups in the league next season, especially on defense, with Van Vliet, Green, one of either Thompson or Brooks, and Bari and Tari. Because of Jabari's frame and size, he can play the nominal center role in those lineups, and they can be fun offensively too, especially if Şengün can hold his own defensively. The main factor for Houston next season is quite simply, how in the world is this all going to work? They have older guys trying to win now, young guys still trying to develop, a head coach mired in controversy, and a bunch of players with questionable shot selection. They also are stacked at the guard spot and wing position, which means that in all likelihood, Jae'Sean Tate will get the short end of the stick. Not to mention that the Rockets will also have to deal with the Kevin Porter Jr. situation after he was arrested in the offseason on charges of assault and domestic violence. And while reports suggested that the Rockets are trying to trade Porter Jr. after this, the more responsible thing to do would be to waive him before any more of his contract guarantees. While that is an ongoing situation, it's hard to imagine him playing in the league ever again, let alone playing for the Rockets this season. Houston has a lot of disaster potential this season because of the sheer combination of players that they have on the roster. Tons of players who want to get their shots up, tons of players who want to get their own opportunity. Ultimately, it could either be a recipe for disaster or it could be the perfect combination for them to have a breakthrough year. It is a huge gamble and one that relies on their coach to sort of rally the troops in a way to get them on the same page. The Rockets' win total is projected at 31.5 games this season, and honestly, I'd be lying to you if I was sure any other way. They haven't cracked 25 wins the past 3 seasons, and while they definitely improved in the talent department this summer, there's potential for this thing to combust in their faces. But if I had to lean one way, I think they crack 35 wins and are in play-in contention. I just think they have too much talent on the roster for that not to be the case. If their young guys can take that next step in their careers, and if the veterans can sign up to facilitate the growth that they were supposed to, they can be successful. Either way, Houston is going to be one of the most intriguing teams of the year because they can either be very entertaining to watch or they can be a complete train wreck. Regardless, it'll be hard to keep your eyes off of it. But what do you think? Can the Rockets make that next step this year? Let us know in the comments, and as always, make sure to like and subscribe to our channel. We'll see you guys next time.